And thank you for choosing Love Kills: The Assassination of Kurt Cobain by Hank Harrison, read by Bradley Dahlberg in 2024. We are now on our way to Chapter 7, Kicking the Gong Over You. The need to be right is the sign of a vulgar mind. Albert Camus. Courtney had a pal named Joe Cole, who had a band and played occasionally in Palo Alto. So when she came down to see him and would conveniently drop in on us. After late 1983 or so, she had also dropped in on our newest member, Francie Warson. More on Francie later. Francie moved to the Silicon Valley from St. Francis Woods in the city to be closer to her big money sex customers, which made it easy for Courtney's pals and her Elizabeth Money, Peyton, and Jennifer Finch to avoid the seedier side of the city when scoring Skag and Speed. The southern proximity also made it easier for Courtney to crash for a night or two. Our place to go was Francie's, up in the Mountain View party, and pick up tips on how to destroy people. Remember also that Courtney dedicated Hole's second album, Live Through This, to Joe Cole, who was murdered about an hour after talking to Courtney at the concert in L.A. I thought that was weird. You would think her record might be dedicated to her recently dead husband. The Joe Cole dedication is also anonymous because, like Kristen Paff, Kurt and Joe died under suspicious circumstances, events indirectly related to Hole and Courtney. Did anybody ever look into the death of Joe Cole? The poor bastard was shot presumably by gangbangers in the front of his West LA house where he lived with Henry Rollins. On one hot August afternoon in 1984, Courtney showed up on our Manola Park doorstep unannounced. I was on my way home from the Lockheed gig, and Catriona had to deal with it alone. No cell phones in those days. Courtney said she had been visiting a friend, and I still think it was Francie and Spike. But by this time, she was on more than simple heroin. This time, she was on a designer smack, Fatal Beauty, heroin laced with fentanyl, which I knew to be a death trip. 3 years later, in 1987, Whoopi Goldberg made a movie about it. Anyway, as soon as Courtney arrived, she started screaming and throwing books around. Again, I was delayed in traffic on my way home, and Catriona, who is amazingly strong from tossing hay bales and handling horses, had to subdue her just to get her calm enough to take some Valium. I got home just in the break up of the girl fight. We did not hit her, but we did have to hold her down. The next day she demanded I kick Joe Hickman, a young homeless kid we had taken under our wing, out of the attic. You have to kick him out, and the blood is thicker than water, isn't it? Followed by, I'm moving in. Poor Joe was regulated to the sofa in the den. I told her this was the last time, no matter how bad it was. I wasn't into heroin. And let he who she is, without Skag Stone and the first crow. I told her that heroin and crack were potential drugs forced into our society by the government black ops. It is designed to break down the rebels and the artisan classes, and the black armies, the Hells Angels, and anything else anti-puritanical, meaning anybody who believes in the literal interpretation of the Constitution. I suggest that she go to rehab, but she spit in my face, and slept for 10 hours, then called the cops to tell them that I had a gram of weed in my desk. The Manola Park cops didn't arrive. Even in those days, the minimalist rule applied. At that time, I didn't know much about her drug activities in LA, Portland, and the Mountain View, but whatever was going on was very dangerous. I also knew that she was writing letters to somebody named Roz. Eventually, her letters to Roz came back unopened and marked, not at this address, with the exception of one addressed to her. I hesitated to show her the letters, but when she dropped by sober on one of her semi-monthly stops, I decided to bring up the topic. After waiting for her mood to bang, to cleanse itself on a Granny Smith apples, I opened up the drawer and showed her the returned letters and the one from Roz directly from Portland. When she finally got around to reading it, her face went into a shen. Another rejection, more abandonment. Later I read the Dear Jill letter. I think the dumping was more than the fact that she was a teeny popper at the time, and Roz was more bent towards women his own age. I never got to the bottom of that. I never met him. I was working full-time. I was angry and hurt that my kid had such a bruised empathy, and reserve wasn't enough to cheer her up. Shortly after Roz's rejection, probably because of it, Courtney Michelle Harrison evaporated and Courtney Love Hate emerged. Pyromania was the name of the fire game to her, and to prove it, she had no respect for my 117-year-old Queen Anne Victorian and threatened to burn it down twice. She would achieve this almost by accident by placing dozens of votive candles a little too close to this antique lace curtains that I had. Then she could say, pouting, "What me? Why no, officer, it was my mean old daddy and his goat lady wife what did it." It was about time, and she began to say that she was going to kill herself, a rock star. We attributed these tirades to the residual teenage angst and hoped that she would just calm down. It worked, and we thought that the only thing that she burned was a red Princess phone. But the house could have gone up if a co-worker who happened to be visiting hadn't smelled something upstairs. Killing the rock star came later. A different type of flame came shooting out of her after that. Years later, I discovered that she took off for Portland and destroyed Roz's pad with a Wicca straw broom, all of the things. Then the same week, she headed for New York and burned out an abandoned warehouse. I think this Roz rejection acted as a trigger to other messed up stuff I did not know about. By the end, she was over 18, but I still worried about her. I soon realized that she was some kind of expanded circuit. She would come back without any explanation and then disappear again. Maybe it was 4 years or more. She spent in and out of teenage prisons and foster homes, and she was getting more rumpled with each visit. She was once around that time had me drop her off at the Victorian on Line Street in San Francisco, where she worked as a sex line girl. I noticed that she was increasingly wise, not because she lit fires or talked dirty to men for money, but because she got away with it. After that, she went to hell in a beautiful pea green boat. Not coat. She started out acting her latent man-hate scenarios towards anybody with balls, and that's about the time that she realized heroin is an appetite suppressant. Most of this is supported in the two books, Bong Water by Michael Homburg and Courtney Love, Queen of the Noise by Melissa Rossi. More about Melissa later. Speaking of telephones, on one of her many in 1984 orbits, she proudly showed me a long list of credit card numbers she extracted from the telephone installation dude, a top secret AT&T matrix. With this master sheet, she made hundreds of free national and international calls and somehow managed to wangle airfare to and from anywhere. During the last year of the Millennial Park, 1984 through 1985, Courtney again went berserk on drugs, and the hate that she felt for me came out even more with ferocity. She was regressing in plain view, whereas she used to be at 15 and acted like she was 24. Now she just passed 18 and was acting like she was 10. She refers to her regressive behavior in this note that she left behind, which I still have. The signs were there. You too could read the government pamphlet and see the signs. I knew she was into opiates. The marks on her arm showed me all I needed to know. She didn't have big red scabby tracks, but I knew she was shooting up like a lot of junkies. Burroughs, for example, and Rimbaud and Coleridge. She was writing terrific poetry, lyrics, and sonnets. I read some of these over lunch on the Stanford campus while I was attending the famed Publishers Conference on the grant applied for materials. Oh yes, she had tracked me. She had tracked me down, even there. It was like she was trying to send me a message. Hey, I can find you no matter where you go, and you can't reject me, and I need to know where you are so I can feel superior to you. Finally, I need to know where you are so I can hurt you and pay you back. This pattern continued at least until 2016, when she sent a team of photographers posing as journalists to snoop on our small horse ranch. For Courtney, revenge again perceived enemies was a form to hide and seek. I could tell her dope habit was getting worse and that she left LA in 1985 and didn't come back. We were looking for priorities on the skyline in Los Altos Hills, and when she sensed we were going to move, she managed to appropriate several rare books, at least one new computer, and an answering machine in my Rolex Oyster, and some pretty sophisticated stereo components, most of which she took to LA and hawked, meaning she took them to the pawn shop for dope. She had no idea that all this really great stuff, the Grateful Dead archive tapes, and the Bronze Age poetry, and Picasso, and the Corbett oil sketch, and the bent leg of the Kachinas, and the Druid Silver Tour, were all in safe storage. Eventually, her stalking game got to be too stressful. I realized Courtney wanted to hurt me. She threatened to kill me on several occasions, and once she said she was going to poison the food in the refrigerator. On another occasion, she said that she had given my toothbrush to an HIV friend, and that I would surely die with AIDS the next time I brushed my teeth. I spoke to a friend of mine who is a head psychiatrist at Stanford, and he said it sounded incurably psychotic and sociopathic, and what is known as borderline personality. That's what Katrina and I realized. We had to move quietly and soon. Spring of 1985. I was still trying to track down my lost son, the child born 2 years before, and Courtney, and given up for adoption. But I couldn't find his mother. The adolescent kept the records on a Rolodex, the embassy she once worked for. She said she had a job in Guatemala and then moved to Cuba. My only clue: Jeff Culbertson, a veteran, of dead cover bands, Grateful Duck, Jerry's Kids, Legions of Phil, was living in the attic after Hickman couldn't take any more of Courtney's crap. This time Courtney didn't ask. She just evicted Jeff while we were at work. He slept in the garage for just 2 nights before I discovered what happened, and took a couple of her guitars with him when he left. These turned out to be Cat's guitars, and I got blamed. In the spring of 1985, we bought 2 Morgan horses and moved to our first ranch in Los Altos Hills. I heard that Courtney was living in the Vats in San Francisco, an abandoned brewery loaded with dope fiends and homeless souls known as the Vat Rats. I hated the idea of my genius daughter might be hanging down on the ropes to sniff stale beer fumes. I told her to get her into a Project Artwad, an art collective in the Mission District, but she said they were all a bunch of potheads with munchies. In spite of her dowry and her dope deals, she was also broke, because she was already a junkie and she knew pot would make her fat. She knew pot would make her fat. That's why she hated all potheads and were adding them to her shit list. Finally, Catriona said she would go back to Scotland if I didn't block Courtney's Rasputious interruptions. We moved and changed all names, links, except one answering service, hooked to an 800 number. I sent that number to her last known addresses in Minneapolis and Topanga, Malibu. If Courtney were serious, she would be a threat to life and limb. If she was just messing around, her constant begging for heroin money made her a dangerous pain in the ass. I accepted my failure and moved on. A full year went by, and predictably, Courtney called me on her July 1986 birthday. She was in the city, crashing at a friend's flat out in California Street near the Jewish Community Center. The place belonged to a rock musician she was dating, and he was on the road. I got the impression that the place belonged to Roz, but I can't be sure. She told me she danced in the Dire Straits video and made a movie called Love Kills. She had said that she was attending the Narcanon meetings and asked me to bring her some food. I consented only after a NA counselor confirmed her attendance. I took David Eyes, an old friend and an executive at Apple, with me just to document the event, because frankly I was nervous. I took 3 bags of groceries up to the city and gave her an Irish fisherman's sweater. I also told her what the designs meant. The designs on the sweaters were used to identify the bodies when they washed up on the beach. Let me turn the page. Understood the simile. It meant, I hoped, I wouldn't have to use it to identify her body. Later in Dirty Blonde, her 2006 confessional, she referred to it as a Versace. It wasn't, but who is counting? In exchange, she gave me a video of Love Kills, the art film she had just finished with Alex Cox. She played the role of a cat-loving street child who stood around and made her droll comments. Love Kills was later released as Sid and Nancy. In case you are terminally unhip, Sid and Nancy is a film documenting the life and times of Sid Vicious, founding member of the Sex Pistols, and his adoring moll, Nancy Spungen. The polychrome film nor feature seemed to be a step down for Alex Cox, the director who gave us Repo Man. Courtney's light came through us as Nancy's gal pal. I knew she was on her way to movie land, although casting Courtney was a brilliant idea. I wondered why Cox would have risked his career on such a stupid topic, but who cares about heroin burnouts and hotel pyromaniacs? Why sanctify the lives of the pea-brained punks who kill time between G-shots by ripping off radiator caps? Contrary to my values, the film was an immediate cult hit, especially in Alphabet City when Dylan said everybody must get stoned. I guess he meant punks too. Like Ken Zanger Fireworks and Ginsberg's Pull My Daisy, Sid and Nancy came out to announce the coming of the next level drug wave. Did Cox actually believe the Squares would go see it? I should have remembered the El Topo, Jerry Garcia's favorite movie. On the soundtrack, America, the band which gave us the heroin lyric, I've been through the desert on a horse with no name. Feels good to be out of the rain. These flicks essentially ripped off German expressionism, flavored by the Jeanette and Jean Cocteau, a lineage that included Todd Browning's Freaks, Courtney's film fantasies, which included Pretty in Pink, On My Beat Max about 30 times, eventually led to a role in the docudrama called The Day That Punk Broke. Courtney's movie gigs began in dark flicks disguised as an important late 20th century filmmaking. Sid and Nancy, which glorified heroin, led the way for the Basketball Diaries, Trainspotting, two mid-90s punk-uramas, billed as anti-heroin documentaries. I could see all that these little films turned out to be subliminal advertisements for Skag. I guess Mr. Brownstone was having his way that day. I guess Cox had a good marketing advice after all. Who would have guessed that junkies would pay for the hard stolen currency to watch their lives flash by? I learned from the streets, like my mentor Nelson Algren said in The Man with the Golden Arm. The only time you can trust the junkies is when they're dead. It's kind of a mean statement. Courtney knew I hated the heroin lifestyle and the sleaze factor that went along with it. That was true even before age. She assumed wrongly that if I ever loved her, I would just go along with the program. She actually believed there was such a thing as unconditional love, and that there may be, but it doesn't apply to junkies. In my old white Negro underworld, once you do smack, you don't go back, and you give up your rights pretty much forever. I worried about her, wandering around. The inability to set down the roots is common with the street kids, as if the child is caught in a perpetual state of marmus, rocking back and forth and shivering, biting fingernails, cutting skin, and wasting away with anorexia. The abandoned child lives in abject fear of more rejection, but the tendril of the active hostility accompanies an abandonment, and the root can grow, sometimes into homicidal rage. It doesn't matter if I actually abandoned Courtney or not. She thought I did. After we managed to leave her behind, I was still truly frightened that she would burn down our house, no matter where we lived. That's what she meant at Kurt's memorial service when she said, "Tough love doesn't work." One thing was obvious. The young people of the world went into mourning for Kurt in a way I have not seen since the assassination of the Kennedys, Martin Luther King. It was as if Kurt had to be killed. That's the first time the word assassination popped into my head. In regards to the case, it took me 2 decades to figure it out. It's a journal entry from Thursday, April 12, 1994. 1 week after Kurt's body was found, millions of people are depressed. Fans, parents, rockers, and even the few junkies who can still shed a tear are in mourning. But who knows? The real story. God. What about Kurt's family? I'll never get to meet them now. Bob Marlowe left 3 CDs at my door this morning. The Raincoats, the Vaselines, and a version of Nirvana's Bleach. I had no idea his yoga trip took him into the grunge scene, but he gets around. I listened to them 10 times and I still haven't got its musicological clue, except the drummers always play both sticks at the same time with the fat ends and tend to be barefooted. And it's loud. Grunge. Punk puts a new meaning to the phrase. I hear you, man. But something about Bleach makes it stand out from the others. The reference to the hydrochloric acid meant the stuff makes you clean your needles with? Even so, the music cut into my nerves on a precise frequency, the frequency that produces goosebumps. The music made me feel like I was peeking into Kurt's first gigs at Gesco Hall in his days before Nirvana, when Kurt and Chris and Chad Channing played the Pencap Chew based in Olympia. April 14th, 1994. I get a call from Dave McElhatton of KPIX TV in the city. Hank, the nation is stunned by Kurt's death. Would you like to say something on air? Yes, I want to offer a bounty on heroin dealers. Drooling, dog-rain, slippery streets, wet enough to get soaked if you were like me, dumb enough to ride a motorcycle in it. Talk about latent suicides. I broke out recently and polished the Norton Commando. I was scheduled to go on a ride with Mean Marshall's crew in Berkeley the next day, but would have to wait. I rode slowly to the city at night. Up 101, it felt good to hear the thwarp of the twin Namels feeding the polished intake ports. I did wear a helmet. I wasn't completely suicidal. During the interview, Dave asked me, "Have you cried yet?" The truth is, I hadn't really cried because I was too angry. Another brilliant soul, a son-in-law I will never get to meet, was sacrificed. And that's the end of Chapter 7. Appreciate everybody that's here. If you could leave me a comment down below, like, share, and subscribe, and I'll try to get as many chapters as I can.